not exactly a Bible question, but it is about some biblical themes. Who do you think the Antichrist may be? Believe it or not, we will not spend most of our time on that question. We will spend most of our time on the pre-67 borders question. And what country will he, the Antichrist, be from, or from what nationality? So,
Nobody knows.
Well, that's true. That's true. Right? And then finally, what did she say? Does he want Turkey?
No, is it Putin?
Oh, is it Putin? Okay. So I was thinking,
hope not in here.
yeah, let's don't do that again. And is he alive now? And so that's a loaded question, but we'll get into that. I'm going to try to answer that. Okay, so plenty of opportunity for conversation, discourse. You can ask questions. You can say, "Wait a minute, what does that mean?" So those are the questions that I got. All right, and so the answers are because they want to. I don't know. No.
I knew he was going to say
funny.
So no. So what I tried to do is I tried to answer the questions. And like I said, the first question really not a Bible question, although it does deal with biblical themes. And so we're going to look at that. So before we ask why does Palestine want to go back to the pre-67 borders, perhaps we should answer the question, who is Palestine, or what is Palestine?
unwanted people.
Okay. As a people, that's not a bad answer, right? Because
The rest of the Arab countries don't want them.
they are Arab by nationality or ethnicity, but none of the other countries claim them. So here we go. There we go. Okay. All right. So Palestine. Let's talk about Palestine. Where does the name Palestine come from? Originally, it is believed that this name was conceived by the Romans more or less as a punishment for the Jews because the Jews had rebelled or revolted. So they began to call the area Palestine. Okay? Basically to offend the Jews. It would be like if we threw a rebellion and the United States government began to call us the west coast of Louisiana. Okay, or California or New York, yeah. Right? So it was meant as an insult, right? Palestine. The name Palestine, hang on a minute, let me just make sure I didn't answer this. Yeah. The name Palestine is believed to be, nobody really knows. It's been like this for centuries, okay? But they believe that the name Palestine was a derivative from Philistines, okay? And so if you'll remember your biblical history, they had a lot of trouble. One of the nations that they didn't ever quite conquer when Joshua led the children across the Jordan River and into the Promised Land was the Philistines, Philistia. Okay, and note, right, there was a giant. David killed him and his 4 brothers. They were all Philistines. Okay, so the Philistines were very warlike people, and they kind of annoyed Israel for quite a number of years. So this was where they think the name Palestine came from. It was a derivative of the Philistine. When Rome came in, so you remember when they asked Jesus in the book of Matthew, they said, "What will the sign of the end of the times be?" Right? And he began to go on this long, and we'll read this here in a little while. He went on a long description. After his crucifixion, in about 70 A.D., Israel kind of rebelled a little bit. Well, the Romans marched into Israel to put down the rebellion. And the Roman general lost control of his troops, and they ran amok and basically burned Jerusalem and the temple to the ground. I mean, just wiped it out. Okay? And that was in 70 A.D. At that time, and we talked about this when we studied other Old Testament military engagements. At that time, one of the ways to pacify a population was to break them up. Okay? One of the things that unites a people together, right, are borders, and you may have heard this if you listen to certain radio stations, but it's true. Borders, language, and culture. Okay? That's what define a people. And so if you destroy their borders, if you wipe the borders off the map, and you take the people, the language, the common language, and you take people and you say, you're going to go, so think of it this way. If Louisiana went to war with Texas, and Texas, because there's no way Louisiana would beat Texas. If Texas beat Louisiana, right, they would say, okay, well, if we leave everybody who lives in Louisiana now in Louisiana, well, then what's going to happen? Reunite. Well, they're going to reunite because they're all Louisianians. Yeah. Cajuns. They're all Cajuns, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to take some of them and we're going to put them in El Paso, and we're going to take some of them and we're going to put them in Amarillo. We're going to take some of them, we're going to put them in Brownsville, and we're going to take our people and we're going to put them in Baton Rouge and New Orleans and all that, right? And so now what have you done? You separated everybody. So now when one Cajun sidles up to somebody else and he goes, hey, we want to start another rebellion, and that other person he's talking to is like, what y'all talking about, right? Oh, wait a minute, that's a displaced Texan. I can't talk rebellion to him. You see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden now you don't have a common purpose. All right, and this is what they would do. They would, and of course, when you're talking the empire, I'm using states as an example. But when you're talking the empire, you can move people hundreds of miles. So they either forcibly moved people or people fled the region, right? They just said, we got to get out of here. And they begin to go to other places, other centers of commerce, other business areas, right? So you're like, okay, nobody's forcing me to move, but dang, I can't make a living here anymore, so I'm headed to Montana because I hear that I can get a job and work in Montana, and so off you go. Well, Montana and then Montanians. Anyway, they don't care about the politics down here on the Gulf Coast, right? So you're up there by yourself, essentially. And so that's what we see. Rome dissolved the nation of Israel basically in 70 A.D. They started moving them around. We're not going to put up with the rebellions anymore. Others left of their own accord, all right? So when that happened, that left a void in the area. What was the nation of Israel? Okay, it left a void, and so what happens with a void? Right? It fills up. So people came in and said, "Oh, look, here's a really nice farm. Nobody's living here. It's my farm now, right?" And so they started farming. And so people moved in from the surrounding areas and began to populate the area. Those people were Arabs, more or less, right? Because that was who was in the surrounding territories. Now, this was fine, but the Roman Empire, I know this is like a history lesson, right? So you're going, oh God, I've been out of high school for years. It's making my head hurt. So the Roman Empire fell in about 300 AD. Okay? It actually split. Do you anybody remember this from their high school history?
No. We didn't go back that far.
You don't go back that far?
I didn't pay attention that close.
Okay. So, if anybody wants to know what it was like when Rome fell,
Downstairs.
read a book, because Alton doesn't know.
I don't know. I didn't remember that far back.
But y'all learned about it when you was in high school.
Yeah. So
How
when
long since I've been out of high school?
did they have high schools back then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I know. When I started school, they were talking about this newfangled thing called high school.
2-story house.
Two-story high school.
Woo! I went to a 3-story high school. So the Roman Empire split about 300 AD, and it became the Eastern and Western. Okay, so it kind of split into two legs, if you will. What we commonly think of as Italy, France, Spain, the lower part of Europe, that was the Western or the Holy Roman Empire, because remember, by this time, the church, the Christian movement had really begun to take hold. That became the Holy Roman Empire. The Catholic Church was exerting some influence. And then the Eastern Empire became basically the Middle East, Turkey, all of that coast, Greece, all of that coast along through there, Egypt, all of those things. And that became Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire. Okay? And that was Constantinople and Constantine. Constantine was the first, one of the early emperors. He saw the cross in the sky and was converted to Christianity. And so that's also the reason the Eastern and the Western remaining parts of the Roman Empire are the reason you have Eastern Orthodox and Orthodox Catholic churches, right? Because they took religious organization in two different directions. So the Byzantine Empire then was what we would consider Israel today, Lebanon, parts of Arabia, Syria, Turkey, Egypt, Libya, that whole back half of the Mediterranean coast, and then almost dead center eastward, particularly along the northern side, that was all the Western, the Holy Roman Empire. So the Byzantine Empire lasted until about 1200 AD, and finally fell to what was known as the Ottoman Empire. Now, when I was in high school, an ottoman was something you put your feet up on when you were sitting in the...
That's still today.
This is still, yeah. So that was an ottoman. But the Ottoman Empire is basically Turkey. And the Ottoman Empire... I've got to figure out why that's doing that. The Ottoman Empire began about 900, grew in influence until it finally took over from the Byzantine Empire, and it lasted until World War I. Okay? And so all that had been the Byzantine Empire was a part of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire was an Islamic caliphate, what's called an Islamic caliphate. So they were Muslim by religion, okay? And the center of power was Turkey, and it peaked in the 14 or 1500s. If you study in your history, right? How many of y'all have? I know you've seen a movie about the Crusaders, the Holy Crusades, right? The guys in the white robes with the big red crosses on their chest, right? England sent soldiers into the Holy Crusade. That was the Eastern Roman, the Orthodox Roman, Holy Roman Empire, or church, influencing the individual kingdoms, because the Holy Roman Empire had kind of broken up into individual kingdoms. So you had the Pope, and he was calling on kings. Kings were sending their armies to be under his command, and they were attacking Israel, the Holy Land, trying to take it back from the Turks, the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire, okay, from the heathen, as it were. And so 1500s, you had these skirmishes. You still had east and west, but it was firmly in the Ottoman control, and except for brief periods, remained in the Ottoman Empire until, like I said, until about World War I. Now, the decline of the Ottoman Empire really started in the 1700s. It finally fell as a result of World War I. World War I had the effect of changing the Middle Eastern map. Okay, there are countries today that did not exist before World War I, right? Persia was what was referred to as a large portion of the Middle East, and that became Iraq and Iran. Saudi Arabia popped up on the map after that. Until then, it was just known as the Arabian Peninsula, and then it became Saudi Arabia. Jordan, it was known as Transjordan. So all those little countries that we would be familiar with today did not exist before then. So when World War I was over, the Ottoman Empire broke up, all these little countries popped up, and Palestine became a more defined area on the map. Okay? But it became, as a result of World War I, England became the administrator of the area known as Palestine. And so between the two great wars, England administrated or was in charge of that area that we now call Israel, that area known as Palestine. Now remember that the Jews had not been a nation from 70 AD. When they left, they left into the immediate and surrounding areas and then gradually migrated further and further away. And so by the time we get to the 1920s and the 1930s, in the aftermath of World War I, World War I ended in 1918, I think, or 1917, 1918, right in that area. Most of them were living in either Russia, Germany, various parts of Europe, some in England and some in the United States. Okay? And so England became the administrator of this area. It was under their jurisdiction as a custodian of this land after World War I. Now, England politically was on again, off again about allowing Zionist Jews. There began a Zionist movement. In other words, that was devout Jews, religious Jews, saying, we need to return to our home. Right? We have a homeland. Abraham, and they will point to those sections in the Genesis in the Old Testament where Abraham bought a piece of land from Hagar. Anyway, he bought a piece of land from one of the residents there to bury Sarah in. And so they said, look, we paid for it. Here's the deed. Right? And so England kind of oscillated back and forth. Oh, yeah, we need to do something. No, we don't want to do anything right now. Yeah, we need to do something. So they were on again, off again. But there was a Zionist movement. Jews were beginning to move back into that area. But they were doing it privately. It was not sanctioned by any governments or anything like that. It was just people showing up, stepping off the boat, and walking out and planting their little flag and going, okay, this is my place now. And there were skirmishes. There were little for lack of a better word, wars over territory. Okay, so they were fighting, etc. The U.S. was also on and off again, right? Sometimes they were for it. Actually, they would be for it, and then there'd be a little fight and flare up, and then they'd all go, oh, let's everybody calm down. We're not going to let no more Jews in for a while. So it was that kind of a thing, right? Nobody felt very strongly about it except for the Jewish people and the Arabs who were living there. They were the only two that felt really strongly one way or the other about this. So In 1947, so now we have, you know what happened in the early 40s? Well, actually it started in the early 30s, right? The run up to World War II. So Europe became involved throughout the 30s. And then, of course, in 1940, the United States got involved, and we had World War II, right? So when World War II was finally over, most of the Arab nations had allied with Germany, all right? And, of course, that was not the winning side. And so we came out of World War II, and England kind of got on board with putting the Jews back in Israel. And most of the Western, particularly the Allied nations, right, the winning side, were so outraged by what had happened in Germany, the Holocaust, and the 6 million Jews that had died, that most of them said, yeah, that we got to do something. We got to give them their own homeland. We can't trust any nation to care about a transitory population. Now, here's one of the amazing things. From 70 AD to 1947, and no, I'm not going to do the math, all right? For all those centuries, I know, I'm sorry, brother, I'm sorry. Milt's over here going, what? So, for all those centuries, something that had never happened before in the history of the world had happened. And that is a people who had been removed from their homeland, right? Dispersed into diverse cultures, had remained religiously and culturally identifiable. Okay? That's the amazing part of this up until now. It gets more amazing, but that's the amazing part of this up until now. No other time in history has that happened, right? You can go and look at all of the major conquests throughout history where people were conquered and then either dispersed or just ruled over, and eventually they assimilate. Okay? It's like the Borg, right? Resistance is futile. You will assimilate. And they become a part of that culture, right? And so the Jews, and this is one of the reasons why throughout those centuries, the Jews were, to put it nicely, picked on. It's why they were abused. It's because they refused to give up their cultural identity. Now, we see a lot of that same thing happening even today in Christian circles. Christians are, for the most part, true Christians are, for the most part, easily identifiable, right? You can find them in specific times of the week down at the local church, okay? So you kind of know where to go. It's like putting a hog trap out there, and then you show up 3 days later and it's like, oh, look, I have hogs in there, right? You just sit and watch a church, and eventually it's going to fill up with what? Christians, okay? In fact, and I can't remember where it was now, I read a headline, what's today? Today's Wednesday. So late last week, I read a headline. So one of the countries over in this part of the world where we're talking about, the eastern part of the country, the Middle East, a group of people attacked a church and killed like 70 Christians who were attending church. And it's the run up to Passover, to Easter, okay? And so they killed 70 Christians. Well, they were easy to find, right? Where else are they going to be? But if we were told you cannot go to church, in fact, 4 years ago, we were told you cannot go to church. And what did we, as a group of people, find a way to do?
Came to church.
Have church, right? And so Christians tend to do that. And so this is kind of the mindset in the Jewish nation. Now, they take it a little further, right? For all these centuries, they maintained their cultural, their heritage, their ethnicity by refusing to marry outside of their ethnic identity, right? Now, and you've always been able, one tribe marry another tribe, but you always married, basically you married into a son of Jacob, right? And we're learning about that. We've been reading that for some time, right? Jacob, and he's had 12 sons. And then those 12 sons had a bunch of families. So they marry tribe to tribe, right? Now there are exceptions where a man can marry from outside of Israel, and the children are still considered Jewish, right? And we see that once in, I'm trying to think if it was twice. Once in Jesus' lineage, in Jericho. You remember the prostitute Rahab hung the red thread in her? Did you do it? You got it? Oh, you get a blue ribbon. Oh, it was red. It's a red ribbon. Okay, I'm sorry. It was a red ribbon. She's like, no, it wasn't a blue ribbon, brother. It was a red ribbon. No, you get the blue ribbon. She had the red ribbon.
That was the lady of the women's night last night.
Oh, was that who it was? Okay. So she hung that deal.
You have us study. You're talking about the women from the previous Tuesday.
Well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to study my word. I'm not doing that. So, but anyway, a man. They rescued her out of the city. A man married her. And several generations later, here comes Jesus, right? Out of that lineage. She was in that family lineage. So in 1947, right, the Jews worldwide are still an identifiable people because of their rules about marrying and their religious belief system, and they are still an identifiable people. So in 1947, the UN passes a resolution, and they recognize a geographical boundary for the nation of Israel, and they also recognized a boundary for the Arabs in that area, and it was called Palestine. All right, so Palestine's come all the way from the Roman Empire forward, Palestine. All right. Now, as the British began to withdraw from this area, because in 1947 the resolution was passed, these were now two independent areas, right? And so as the British began to withdraw, fighting broke out, and it was savage fighting between the Arabs and the Jewish people, right? They began immediately to fight. The Jewish people were defending themselves. The Arabs were attacking. And the Arabs, the resident Arabs of that land felt like we're being put upon. The Jews are moving in here and they're taking this place away from us, right? Well, Palestine was a geographical area named. It did not have a people, okay? And that's one of the reasons that the UN made this deal. In 1948, Israel declared themselves as an independent nation. The U.S. quickly recognized that and provided some support, as well as many unlikely sources like Czechoslovakia and Russia. Now, it is surmised or supposed that the only reason Russia supported Israel, the formation of Israel, was because they thought they could stir up some trouble, right, with the U.S. They did it mainly to stick a finger in the U.S.'s eye, right? So they, we'll recognize them too. We'll get them beholden to us for military support, right? It's one of those kind of deals. And so in 1948, they became, they declared themselves a nation. They had a government, elected government. And the fighting over the 1947 resolution, the fighting finally ended in 1949. The fighting did not end in 1949, okay? But Israel was there, right? And it was going to be the thing. Okay, so let's look at the map here. So in 1967, This was the area known as Palestine. Okay, and this is before the 1967 war. We haven't covered that yet. So this is what it looked like 47 and throughout the 50s and most of the 60s. So this little tan place right here, that's Palestine. You see this little carve out right here? That's carved out because right there, that's Jerusalem. And the line goes right through the middle of Jerusalem. So it's a split city, right? Now, this is Gaza down here. Gaza's been in the news a lot here lately. So that was Gaza, and that was a part of Palestine. So you had Palestine here, and Israel all up and through here. And as you can see, you got Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Sinai, which Egypt claimed at the time. That's pre-67 borders. Okay? So you keep that in mind as we move through the next couple of decades. I'm sorry if this is a little bit like high school history. I'm trying not to make it that way, but
I'm enjoying it. Go ahead. This is good.
Okay. I felt like the more I started trying to do this, I felt like we need to understand how we got here. And this is by no means, I don't want you to think that this is everything. I mean, I'm only hitting the highlights, okay? There's a lot of stuff to read. I was going through it and I was like, oh, I can't do this. We'll be here for 3 weeks, right? Julie will just go, and kick over out of the back of her chair. She's already reliving those high school moments, you know. Okay. All right. So
I need to go sit in the back row.
You got yes. Well, I lost John already.
Yep.
John had to get up and leave. So okay. So this is the pre-67. Okay. So what happened in 1967? Now remember that in 1947, the Arabs were not happy that the area was made into Israel. Right? Even though the Jordanians, let's go back. Even though the Jordanians had their own country, and the Syrians had their own country, and the Lebanese had their own country, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, they had their own countries. The people who were living here were Arabs, primarily, I think, ethnically from Jordan. Okay? And they were given a little place here because they had been living kind of in this area anyway. But they weren't happy. And so in 47, when the fighting finally started, all those nations told the Palestinians, look, don't worry. We'll find an opportunity. Don't accept any peace treaties. So they wouldn't sign anything, right? Don't accept any treaties. We're gonna get this back for you. So in 1967, the Arab nations, the ones I just pointed out, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, all massed on the borders that they had with Israel, and they were going to, quote, drive the Jews into the sea. Okay, they were not going to leave them a place. Now, even in today's protest, one of the phrases you hear is from the river to the sea. And the river is the Jordan River, which was the border, and they were going to drive them into the sea, okay? Leave them no place, okay? And so they were going to restore Palestine to its pre-47, 48 Muslim rule. In other words, the Ottoman Empire. In other words, the Islamic Caliphate, okay? Now, it's important that I point something else out during this time. During the Ottoman Empire, during the Islamic Empire, one of their strategies, not really a strategy, but it's not a characteristic. And one of the things they do is wherever they win a major victory, they build a mosque. right? And so now you can't touch it. It's a religious holy site, right? You may not realize this, but in New York City, at the site of the World Trade Towers, there is just off to one side a mosque. So when the Ottoman Empire took over that area, now remember they didn't wreck the temple. The Romans did that, but it lied in ruin for all those years. And when the Muslims moved in there, they said they built a mosque right there in the most holy place for the Jews, so they could claim it as their own. Now, for hundreds of years in the Islamic religion, they wouldn't even mention the name of Jerusalem. It was considered a place of waste. And when I say waste, I mean animal waste. Okay? And many, as a matter of fact, Muhammad once made a comment about it. I wouldn't even take my donkey to Jerusalem, right? Some hundreds of years later, when the Jews started moving back in, 1940, well, the early 1900s, late 1880s, 1890s, when the Jews started trying to move back in, all of a sudden, you had Islamic teachers going, oh, but wait, Muhammad went magically from Mecca on his donkey to Jerusalem and there ascended into heaven. And that's why we have a mosque there. They invented it out of whole cloth, right? But they made it into their third holiest place. So they had a reason not to give it up. All right, so in 67, they decided to attack because they wanted to restore what had been for centuries. All right, this plan backfired spectacularly, and it ended up with Israel having even more land than they started with in 1947. All right? Now, again, I'm only hitting the highlights here. There were attacks in 55 and 73. None of these significantly changed the borders. Okay? So this is what it looked like after 1967. Okay? So you will notice that Israel had taken over the Sinai. You'll notice that Jerusalem, all this here, what's now known as the West Bank, Gaza, all of that is gone. Israel took it during the war. And there's a little extra up here. This is what's known as the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is a hilly type mountain range. It's the high ground. And when they let Syria have it, the Palestinians would camp up there in the mountains and shoot rockets at them. You know, it was unbearable. So to this day, they have not surrendered the Golan Heights. Right? They won't give it back. Now, as a part of some of the peace treaties, they've had to allow in the West Bank Arab settlements. Okay? In Gaza, they had to give Gaza back, and they came and relinquished the Sinai, so they came back to this line right here that you saw before, and they allowed the UN to do some peacekeeping in there for a time in order to keep the peace. But the result of the 1967 war, that this was all conquered territory. That's how big the plan backfired, right? So now the Palestinians, as an Arab group, have nothing, right? And so this kind of explains. So now you can see, if you think back, see if I can get back. Now you kind of understand why they want to go back to this map. So when they say they want to go back to the pre-67 borders, they want to go back to this. And they want to take this away from Israel, okay? Now, like I said, Israel has already backed away from the Sinai, and they backed away from this. They didn't give this up. They did allow Arab settlements, and they didn't give up the Golan Heights here. Okay? So that's the state today. And Jerusalem is theirs, although they allow the Muslims to come in and go on the site. And so that's where we're at today. So when you hear them say, we want to go back to the pre-67 borders, why do they want to go back to the pre-67 borders? Because they need a foothold. The Palestinians as an organization, as a people, have no place to be. Right now, we are witnessing they're basing their operations from where? Gaza. That's all they got left.
So they're already at the sea, so they can't.
Yeah, they got their backs to the water. But what has happened in Gaza? Israel finally has had enough, and they've swept through there, and they have destroyed the Palestinian resistance, quote unquote. I mean, they're leveling buildings and digging up tunnels, and they're just decimating it. Okay, so if you understand the stated goal of Palestine, many of the Arab Muslim nations feel the same. So the desire to return to a pre-67 border is a first step. It's a way to weaken Israel and make them stronger, give them a foothold, a place to launch from. Right? So that's why we see this, we must return to a 67 border. Okay? So, again, I apologize for the history lesson, but the question is, about Palestine. Now that we know how it came and what started with it, right? Or at least we know a little bit. It's kind of easy to understand. Oh, this is why they want to go back to a pre-67 border. Because why would you pick that? Well, you would pick that because that's the moment of your greatest defeat, right? So I'm sure that the Germans would like to go back to a pre-1918 set of borders, right? And we could go back through time. The Confederacy would like to go back to a pre-1850 set of borders, right? I mean, it would, any losing side would love to go back to the borders that they had before. Me personally, I would like to go back to about a 1980 border. Oh, wait, is that? No? You're not? Okay. So, the next question. Who do you think the Antichrist may be? Now, we hear a lot about this, right? Especially in Christian circles, in church, we have a lot of discussion about the Antichrist. Antichrist is our favorite villain, right? This is who we're looking for. If somebody popped up tomorrow with Antichrist tattooed across his forehead, we would be up in arms, okay? So who do you think it is to be? What country will he be from? What nationality? And is he alive now? I hate when it does that. Okay. So most of what we know about the Antichrist, and now we're getting into the biblical stuff. Most of what we know about the Antichrist comes from the books of Revelation and Daniel, although there are references in Ezekiel, Thessalonians, and the Gospels among others. So there's mentions of it here and there. Okay. And so, Antichrist as a term was only used by the Apostle John in his epistles. John 1, 2, 3, 4. John 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, the little bitty books right before Revelation. Okay, that's the only place where the term Antichrist is used. Elsewhere, he is known as a false Christ. That's how Jesus refers to him. False Christ or false Christs. Okay. The son of perdition, which is also a term that was used to refer to Judas Iscariot, son of perdition. Okay. The man of lawlessness. Right? He's referred to in some scriptures as the man of lawlessness. And, of course, in Revelations, he's simply referred to as the beast. And no, that is not the limo that the president drives. Okay? It is because of his dominance over the world. He's referred to as the beast. In Daniel, it refers to the Antichrist as the little horn. Meep, meep. Okay? Was that a little horn? Did it
Close enough.
Close enough.
It
Okay.
sounded like a little blue Prius.
I thought maybe it sounded a little bit like the Roadrunner. Meep, meep. Okay. So he's referred to. So the Antichrist is just a title, and it's not even the most used title to refer to this person that will be the opposite of or in opposition to Jesus, in opposition to God, Antichrist. Okay? Okay, so what is the Antichrist going to look like? Now, I'm not going to read all these scriptures. I'll leave it up there if you want to make a note. You can make notes. You can go read for yourself. Maybe that'll have you form more questions. But in Daniel, we see a description. So apparently he's a very charismatic speaker, able to sway opinion. After all, he convinces the whole world to follow him. Right? It doesn't come out, I just want to, the scripture does not come out and go, he was a very charismatic speaker, right? But it describes the persuasion that he had over others. And so we see even in our own political arena right now, right? The President of the United States, right? When he speaks, half the people stand up and cheer, and the other half of the people stand up and jeer, right? Boo, boo, right? So would you call that a charismatic speaker?
No.
Maybe. Maybe. He might be a charismatic speaker, at least for half the people. But the Antichrist will be different in that he will have all the people. The only people that will see through him will be the Christians, the believers. So we see that in Daniel. We see that in Revelations. He's a charismatic speaker. Okay? He's a crafty politician. Right? He's a baby kisser. Right? He knows how to shake the hands and stroke the egos. And we see that because he brings about peace in a place, Jerusalem, that there has been no peace for hundreds of years. All right? So he's a very, very crafty politician. He has a distinct physical appearance. Okay? He will be something. He will be a man of rugged handsomeness, someone that people will look at and aspire to be. Tom Cruise, only taller.
Yeah.
Because Tom Cruise is a little bit short guy, so taller, right? Apparently you get about 8 inches on film, right? You
Less crazy. Less crazy.
And less crazy, yeah.
Flat top.
He will be a military genius, right? The way he takes over the world, he convinces armies or forces them, depending on which scriptures you read, to lay down arms. We see that in Revelation. He's an economic genius. He sets up a system of economics that require the government, i.e. his approval, to do anything. Perhaps you remember from our study of Revelations, which took us many months, right? The mark of the beast in the hand of the forehead, so that no one could buy or sell that didn't have the mark of the beast. Right? So he sets up an economy, okay? He's a blasphemer. He slanders and rails against God, right? He's utterly lawless. We see that in 2 Thessalonians. I covered it twice. He's selfish and he's a selfish, ambitious egomaniac. He requires worship of himself. Now, technically, he, at least according to Scripture, never says, worship me. His chief henchman says, you should worship him. But he believes he is as powerful as God, okay? The false prophet, that's his chief henchman. It's the false prophet who sets up the worship of the beast. The beast simply says, well, of course. Of course. right? He's a greedy materialist. We see that in Daniel 11. When Babylon fell, we read in Revelation, when Babylon fell, the riches and the glory of it being destroyed caused all the people to lament, right? They all wept over it. He's controlling. He will control everything. Proud, self-exalting above God and everything. A miracle worker. One of the things the Antichrist will do to prove his bona fides is he will work miracles. He will call down fire from heaven, right? Among other things. In fact, in Revelations, we see that he's wounded. Actually, we see this in Daniel too. He's wounded and supposed or actually dead and raised from that condition by the power of Satan and restored to life. So he's a miracle worker. Even Jesus alluded to this, right? In Matthew, he alludes to the fact they will say to you, Messiah is here. Christ is there in the desert. He's in the city. He's over. Don't go. The Messiah has already been here, right? Where will he come from? All right, so that answers the question of what will he look like, right? But where will he come from? Any ideas?
Well, if I remember our study, one of them comes from within the nation of Israel, and the other one comes from outside. Because one of them was in the land, the other one from the sea. From the sea.
Exactly. So I believe the beast came from the sea. Y'all remember that, right? It's been a while.
I'll watch the video.
I was going to say Arkansas.
Okay, so where will he come from? So the Bible does not explicitly say, but many theologians believe he will come from the modern day nation represented by the toes of the statue. So you remember in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Remember that?
Yeah.
Head of gold, chest of silver, belly of brass, right? Big brass belly, bong bong, right? Legs of iron, and then feet with toes mixed with clay and iron, right? And so it was successively weaker nations, basically, okay? Now, many people, well, it depends on who's the nation with the last nation, toes and iron, right? So for the longest time, how many of y'all have heard it's the reconstituted or modern day Roman Empire? If you were alive back in the 80s, the European Union was going to be the feet of the statue and from whence the Antichrist came. As a matter of fact, if you read the books left behind, right, the Antichrist is represented as being from somewhere in Eastern Europe. The country is not really named, Romania, Hungary, somewhere like that. But that was the line of thinking at the time. But this nation is supposed to be at various times the Roman Empire. But if you had been alive back when John was writing Revelation, everybody thought Nero was the Antichrist. Okay? The papacy, the Pope, when the Roman Empire died, the Pope kind of took his place, or took the place of the Roman Empire, at least in the Western world's mind, because in the Eastern world, it was Constantinople, or Byzantine. Okay? And then over time, Russia, the USSR. Back in the Cold War, it was the USSR. Now it's just Russia, right? Russia, that's where he's coming from. Gog and Magog coming down from the north, right? But there's a new school of thought that believes that Gog and Magog may actually be Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. And then, of course, we have the symbolism that the brother referred to earlier about could be from within the nation of Israel itself. That false Christ will be as Jewish as the real Christ was. Bottom line is we don't know. We don't know. All right? We're all over the map trying to figure this out, as you can see. Okay? We don't know where he's coming from. Again, if he shows up with a name tattooed across his forehead, right, he's a dead man. But he won't show up like that, right? He's going to be slick. He's going to be sneaky. I've mentioned this before. How many of y'all have ever read Hal Lindsey's book? He wrote it in 1968 or 9, The Late Great Planet Earth. I thought the brother was fixing to raise his hand. I was going to say, you really? Yeah, you. You moved your hand. I'm like, wow. And then you give me this psych, fake out. In that book, because I read it, and in that book, no, I didn't read it when it was published. I found it in a used bookstore many years later. Okay?
Not that.
But in that book, in 1968-69, they were coming out with a newfangled phone. So how many of y'all remember going through these motions to dial a phone number?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay? Well, they were coming out with a newfangled phone. And it went like this. Doop, 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 doop. Right? And amazingly enough, it had 2 buttons on it that didn't do anything.
Yeah.
What were those 2 buttons for? Why, those 2 buttons were to communicate with something called, for us poor folk that never dreamed of this, something called a computer. And a computer was going to be the way that the Antichrist could control the world. So the phone and the computer and now it seems laughable because we got AI coming up, right? And of course, anybody knows it's going to be AI, right? Skynet is coming. That's an obscure movie reference for those of you who are not paying attention. Okay? Skynet is coming. I'll be back. That's the only hint I'm going to give you. All right? So the thing is, Jesus gives us some hints, right? You see, when you see the trees budding out, how many of y'all have seen the trees budding out? Right? What does that tell us?
Spring.
It's springtime now, but what's coming?
Summer.
Summer is near, right? What does summer mean? Hot. Hot. Right? This is a Gulf Coast. It's going to swelter. Right? There's a word for it. Right? So next time, instead of saying it's hot, just say it's sweltering. Right? It's a lot more fun. Right? You get a little more satisfaction out of that. Right? But if you've been outside this week, does hot or swelter or summer describe the weather we've been having? No.
Not really.
No. But what do we know is coming?
Heat.
Summer. Heat. Right. So, even though, and that's what Jesus told us, right? He gave us some signs. Wars, rumors of wars, things that happen here, things that are happening there. You'll know that it's close. Okay? So, is he alive now? Well, according to John 4:1-3, beloved, do not believe every spirit. Test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. Every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of Antichrist. Remember I told you, John in his epistles, that's where he used the term. This is the spirit of Antichrist, which you heard was coming, and what? Now is already in the world. So Antichrist is here.
The spirit.
As a spirit, right? As a spirit. What was Hitler? Spirit of Antichrist.
Yep.
He was a form of, right? What was Kaiser? Form of. We can go all the way back through history. The Ottoman Empire, form of, okay? All of these things, forms of. So the Spirit is here, but the embodiment in one person will depend on how close to the tribulation we are. Okay? Because he's not going to live for 150 or 200 years. He's going to be a regular man. That was one of the meanings behind 666. He's just a man. All right? So, let's do a quick mental exercise. I know it's getting late and everybody's tired. We're like, oh, I can't think. Okay, just I want everybody to stretch. And I want you to pull a thinking muscle. Right? So everybody gets stretched out. So here we go. So God likes to do things in sevens, right? 7 days, 7 years, 70 years, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. He likes sevens. Right? We know that Jesus will reign for 1,000 years, a millennium, right? That leaves 6,000 years if we're following the rule of sevens. I'm not using this as I'm just giving this an exercise. Just an exercise, okay? The Jewish accounting of years is believed to start with Adam. So what year are we in on our calendar? 2025. That's 2,025 years from when? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, right? Anno Domini, year of the Lord, right? So 2000. So we reckon time based on the big change that allowed us to become family members with God, right? To be adopted in, right? The Jews, they reckon time from Adam. And so we are now living in the year 5785. Right? 5785. So that means that in 215 years, we will have completed 6 millennia. If we know, now this is just an exercise. Don't anybody go home and say, well, they said we got 215 years left. Pack your bags, honey. We're getting ready to go.
You said 6, and that says 7th, and we're all like, huh?
Yeah. Well, remember.
Until the 7th.
Yeah, it's the 7th millennium.
Starts.
So when we hit the year 6,000, we will have completed 6,000 years. You follow what I'm saying? So there will be 6 already done. We'll be in the 7th, even though the numbers will be 6. It's just like we are now in the 21st century, even though we're in the 20-somethings, right? So, but that's what it is. So if we subtract 215 from 6,000, because remember we took 1,000 years off, we got 215 years. So Antichrist's not going to be here for another couple of hundred years, right? We're all going to be dead and in the ground before he gets here. Unless, right? Unless we go to Matthew 24 and 22, where Jesus said, except those days be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Now, most theologians believe he was not talking about the church, Christians. He was talking about the Jews, the elect. Okay? And so if that's true, what he's saying is, I have to shorten the time period or there'll be no Jews left. Now, if they think that this only speaks of the very, very end of time, right, then it would seem to indicate that he's talking about shortening the 7-year tribulation. But there's nowhere else in Scripture that supports that. If he's referring to the calamity of the Jewish nation that started with the fall of Jerusalem some 2 millennia ago, if he's saying this time period between 70 AD and the tribulation, I got to shorten that. Because if I let that run its full course, then there's not going to be Jews left. If I let the world have their way, right? So if he references it to that, then the days we are living in right now, the 215, right, could be shortened. So that means what?
We don't know.
Right. So that means that the physical embodiment of the Antichrist might be alive right now, and the end may be closer than you think. Right? So once again, right, the advice we get from Scripture, be watchful, your redemption draws nigh, right? We don't know when it's going to happen, okay? Understand this, Jesus was speaking. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would not permit his house to be broken into. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected.
Right.
Right? We don't know. Could be today. Could be tonight. We may not make it home. I may not get to say amen. God calls us home. Might not. I may have to face death. Who's the youngest one in here? Shayna. Oh, well, all right.
No, Shane,
Oh, okay. Shayna, you may have to face death
by your team.
before Jesus comes. We don't know. One way or the other, here's the thing. One way or the other, we're going to meet God. Either by ourselves or in congregational groupings, right? In the rapture. And so, also in Luke 21, Jesus speaking about the end times. So when all these things begin to happen, stand and look up, for your salvation is near. Right? Stand and look up. Always be ready. Okay? Always be ready. We must live our lives ready to meet Jesus on a moment's notice. And I'll close with this. I know I'm running a little late. I'm surprised Jennifer's not busted through the doors. But I'll close with this story. I'm on the way home this afternoon. And there's a truck ahead of me in this other lane. I'm driving along. Beautiful day. Going over the bridge, the Hartman Bridge, and suddenly a piece of metal about that long and about that wide comes flipping out from under that truck, windshield height, right at me. Now, fortunately, it was thin, so it was catching the wind, and I was aware, I was watching, and I did a little zig and did a little zag, and then my truck did a little zig and a little zag. Because when you move the wheel, the truck kind of goes, whoa, you want to do what? And so I avoided it, didn't hit the truck. But the point was, that was completely unexpected. If it had been something a little more substantial, it might have been in the windshield and in the front of the cab with me. Right? It wasn't. Good Lord was watching out for me. Thank you, Jesus. But the point is, we don't know when death comes knocking. Right? We don't know. Might be an accident. Could be an ailment. Right? Heart attack. Could be a stroke. Could be any of these things. So you tell me like...
No.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. She was kind of going, and I'm like, okay, sorry, I'm getting too, but could be any of these things, okay? That's why we have to be ready to meet Jesus. We have to be ready to go home. Because like the pastor said, right? When you stand at the pearly gates, and the angel asks, why should I let you in? Your answer had better not start with I. I was good. I did this. I had faith. The answer had better be, Jesus said I could come in. Right? It's got to start with Jesus. We got to live our lives, right, according to what Jesus tells us. We're not going to be perfect, right? But we're going to be faithful. And we're going to orient our lives according to Scripture. Okay? So that's all I've got for tonight. I hope this answered your questions. Or you
I have a question.
you have what? Who? Where?